So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second in-person Insight series lecture. Today, we are very fortunate to have with us Dr. Joseph Marianus Kujur. He is the director of the Xavier Institute of Social Service in Ranchi in Jharkhand and has worked extensively with the Adivasi communities in Jharkhand and also in the broader Chotanagpur belt. Today, he'll be talking to us about a very important topic among the Adivasis with a special focus on the Oraons. The title of his topic is Religious Conversion and Indigenous Identity, the context of Oraons in Chotanagpur. So this presentation is an outcome of his doctoral study, which he undertook at the Delhi School of Economics. And it engages with a very serious topic about what happens to an indigenous community once they have undergone historical conversion. So I'll give the abstract of the study. I'll ask Sukanya to introduce the speaker, and then we'll have the presentation by Dr. Kujur. The abstract goes as follows. The study is set in the theoretical perspective of religious conversion in general, and that of the Christian Indigenous Oraons in particular. It primarily analyzes how the formation of the identity of a distinctive ethnic group of converts in Chotanagpur takes place over a period of time. This study explores how there are continuous negotiations, thereby leading to the restructuring of the identity of the converts community with relation to those of the non-converts, especially to that of the Sarna Oraons, who are the Oraon members, who are the adherents of their traditional faith called Sarna. This study debunks the thesis of rupture and alienation, which has generally been associated with religious conversion. The findings of this study addresses the notion of conversion and, more importantly, continuity. Continuity in relationships, continuity in the frame of reference, continuity in the system of meaning and values, and continuity in some of the basic tenets of belief. The event of conversion, as demonstrated in the ethnography carried out, is not just a rupture, but it is more to do with an extension of relationships. The study observes that despite social relationships between converts and non-converts, which have been conceptualized primarily and constructed around the notions of betrayal, deviance, fragmentation, rupture, and brokenness, there is space for a continuous construction of convergence as well as confluence. It is not a simplistic counter-argument of continuity to refute the notion of discontinuity. So this talk will address the larger question of identity construction around the network of social relationships manifested in various socio-cultural sites and structural mechanisms, both at the macro, which is the global and the universal, as well as the micro, which is the local and the particular levels. At these two levels, conversion as rupture will engage with the notions of believerhood and citizenship, as well as believerhood and ethnicity. The basic assumption in these notions of denationalization, losing citizenship by the convert, and descheduling, losing the scheduled tribe status by the indigenous convert, is the disaffiliation of the convert from the parental community. And finally, this book argues that through the relationship of the convert, non-convert is dichotomized as the insider-outsider, same, different, other, non-other, national, denational, Indian, foreigner, indigenous, non-tribal. There's also the sameness as well as the mutual solidarity if one looks at the reality a little deeper. With that very broad abstract, I invite Sukanya to introduce our speaker, and we will give him a token of our appreciation.
Thank you, Professor Ashish. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second Insight series of this semester, hosted by the Humanities and Social Sciences Department at IIT Gandhinagar. The Insight series lecture began in 2022 by Professor Ashish Khaka with a focus on indigenous peoples and development issues. Previous luminaries who have graced the lecture include P. Sainath, Professor Rashid Khalidi, Professor Mahmood Mamdani, and Professor Edgar Nyansunu. Today, we are very fortunate to have with us Dr. Joseph Marianus Kujur. He is the director of Xavier Institute of Social Service, XISS, Ranchi. He is a gold medalist in BA English Literature from Loyola College, Chennai, University of Madras, and an MA in Anthropology from Pune University. He completed his PhD from the Department of Sociology, Delhi School of Economics, and postdoctoral studies at Georgetown University, Washington, D.C. He has, to his credit, 8 authored, co-authored, and edited books, including ones with Sage, Primus, etc., and more than 40 articles in books and journals of national and international repute. He was a member of the core group of the Ministry of Tribal Affairs, Ministry of Women and Child Development, and Ministry of Minority Affairs to work on recommendations for the 12th 5-year plan 2012 to 17 submitted to the Planning Commission. He was a member of the Sectoral Innovation Council constituted by the Ministry of Tribal Affairs to prepare a roadmap for 10-year indigenous development, and that of the expert team of the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare to prepare a roadmap for improving indigenous health. He was a member of the team constituted by the Ministry of Rural Development to review the implementation of rural development programs by the non-official members of the Advisory Committee on Tribal Development. He's a member of the Board of Governors, XLRI Jamshedpur, since 2023, a member and governing board of the Catholic Bishops' Conference of India, CBCI, Society of Medical Education North India, Mandar, and the chairman of Education Desk, Indian Chamber of Commerce, ICC, since 2023. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Joseph Marianus Kujur to IIT Gandhinagar.
For the lecture, we'll just give Dr. Kujur a small token of our appreciation. So, Kanya, if you can. For you, to us, can let's have a look at that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Good evening to everybody. Professor Ashish Khaka and honorable members of the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences and all the learned members of this house. It's indeed a privilege and honor for me to be here. Thanks for having me on this campus and very especially for this presentation. I'm just going to share with you what I have and more than what I have, I'm going to learn from you because I suppose after the presentation is over, we'll also have little interaction and some interesting questions I'm expecting. So therefore, it's a learning process for me as well. So having said that, let me first make my observations, initial observations, and then I'll give the brief structure of the book itself, and then I'll go to other parts of the presentation. Look at the very title of the presentation itself, Religious Conversion and Indigenous Identity. I would like to draw your attention to this very title because a little later we'll be discussing tribal identity and indigenous identity, etc., various concepts. These are very, very problematic, at least in the context of India. If you have read the article by Professor Virginius Khaka in APW, he has specifically mentioned that the term indigeneity or the concept of indigenous identity is problematic in the context of India because a group of people may be indigenous in one part of the country but may not necessarily be indigenous in another part of the country. Scheduled tribes who are enlisted as scheduled tribes in Jharkhand or Chhattisgarh or Odisha, for instance, are not scheduled tribes in Assam or in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. So therefore, there are similar problems. And therefore, one more observation I would like to make on the title itself is, see, there are as many tribal religions as there are tribes. And the generic term tribal itself is little problematic, because there could be an Oraon religion, a Munda religion, a Kharia religion, but tribal is a generic term. Tribal as a generic term does not necessarily have religious functionaries as such acceptable by other ethnic groups, etc. So this itself is problematic. Similarly, indigenous people, indigeneity also, that also could be looked at from a critical point of view, and we'll get back to that a little later. But let us now proceed. I would like to make a mention of the fact that I'm making this study as a student of social anthropology, not as a believer. I'm making a study, or I'm writing this book or writing this thesis, no, not in defense of faith. It's purely a research work. And therefore, it does not answer all the questions regarding conversion or tribal identity or indigenous identity. But it could answer some of the questions which are in debate or discussion across the country today. And that I find very, very interesting. And one more point I would like to mention is when this book was in the press, that time across the country, there were only 7 so-called anti-conversion bill, because the real title of those acts or bills used to be Freedom of Religion Act. Okay, so but that also could be debated. So there used to be 7, but as of now, there are 11 plus 2 others either have been withdrawn or because of the protest or because of better sense prevailed among the powers that be. Having said that, let me give a brief sort of outlines of the presentation. The book comprises 8 chapters. What you see in number 1, of course, the chapter 1 problematizes the whole notion of conversion and tribal identity. It conceptualizes the notion of tribal identity. It also contextualizes the study. In Mandar, in a village called Malti, which is about 29 to 30 kilometers from Ranchi. And I'll come to that once again. But what you see in number 2, main arguments in the book, that's from chapter 8. That's the last chapter, okay? But I would like to give a brief structure at this juncture, which will be helpful for those of us who have not been able to read the book. As I pointed out in the first chapter, I problematized the whole notion of conversion and tribal identity. But in chapter 2, whereby I have an overview of the literature on conversions, on identity, etc., they discuss discourse or discourses on indigenous identities. I'm saying identities, not identity, because there is no homogeneity as such. In the context of tribes, we also call their societies societies, tribal societies, because there is no homogeneity. There is heterogeneity. So the second chapter tries to discuss identity and religious conversion. The third chapter looks at the identity formation of the Oraons through the ages. In the pre-colonial period, colonial period, and post-colonial period. So therefore, we'll have a brief overview of all that in chapter 3. I'm not going chapter-wise here in my presentation. I'll just make some observations and what the findings of the present study are. Now, when we look at chapter 4, it discusses the emergence of a new religious community and how the construction of identity takes place. Not in a rigid sense, but how identity is porous, how it is relational, how it is contextual, as many scholars have pointed out. So therefore, we are not looking at culture or identity as stagnant. Again, coming to chapter 5, we look at conversion and changing social relationships. This is one of the challenges, one of the problems we have been debating and discussing, whether everything has changed with conversion, social relationships, kinship relationships, and relationships at various levels, And therefore, what are the sides which need to be addressed, or what are the sides of identities we need to identify and discuss whether there is or there has been a restructuring of identity of the indigenous Oraons in this context. Coming to the 6th chapter, we'll look at the interface of the new tradition with the old. And if you look at the way negotiations have taken place and they are still taking place, then you realize that identity is not stagnant, but there is continuous progression as far as identity formation is taking place. And finally, coming to the 7th, 8th, I'll come back, but in the 7th chapter, we discuss the modes of identity articulation among the Oraons, how the Sarna people or Sarna community perceives Oraon identity in this context, and how the right-wing nationalists perhaps identify the Oraons or converts and their identity. And also we look at some other articulations, perceptions and expressions. But here, let's now look at the very problematic itself. So the question of identity is debated or being debated ever since it came into inception. It's one of the most used and misused concepts in contemporary times. In academic circles and everyday life, the identity is conveniently used without often being aware of what it really means. And therefore, Brubaker and Cooper argue that the term identity tends to mean too much, too little, or nothing at all. Okay, too much then understood in a strong sense, too little understood in a weak sense, and not at all because of its ambiguity. Now, conversion and identity need to be understood from the point of view of its complexity. As we have just seen, the question of identity primarily of the converts is very complex, and in the context of the tribals, because now Sarna, I understand that all of us know what Sarna stands for. Sarna stands for the traditional tribal faith, Sarna people, Sarna community. But Sarna actually means a place of worship. It's actually in the middle of the sal groves. Sal trees are there, and people go there, especially those who who are affiliated to the Sarna faith. They go to the in the midst of the sal groves and have their worship. And therefore, in every village, practically, a place is demarcated for their worship. So that's known as Sarna. But it's a place of worship, but in the name of Sarna, the community also identifies itself as belonging to the Sarna community. Now, during the last more than 150 years or so, tribal societies have gone through unprecedented change, social transformation, because of various reasons. There are many processes of social cultural change. One of them could be westernization, Sanskritization, industrialization, education. Conversion is one of them. Okay, education being another strong force of socio-cultural change. And therefore, religious differentiation, particularly conversion from a traditional religion to Christianity, has been in discussion and debate for quite some time. And therefore, today we are going to address this very question. Now, conversion is a phenomenon. It's a sociological phenomenon. And there are conversions taking place to other prophetic religions as well. Hinduism is not a prophetic religion, but Islam, for example, is a prophetic religion. Buddhism, Jainism, etc. So there have been conversions to other religions also, but what has come to the limelight or has been in debate and discussion is conversion to Christianity, particularly in India. So against this backdrop, the issue of tribal identity of converts and their relationship with those adhering to the traditional faith becomes very significant. And as I said at the very outset, the study has been conducted in the context of the Oraons in Chotanagpur. But let me also make it clear, if we apply the same principles and same conditions, the findings of the present study will be applicable to other situations as well. And therefore, even if we talk today in terms of the Oraons of Chotanagpur, it will be applicable also to the Mundas, to the Hos, to the Santhals, etc. And as we know, religion is one of the most powerful means of transformation. But let's look at this framework. As I said, it's within the larger framework of the sociology of conversion in general and the sociology of tribal identity of the converts to Christianity in particular. But let's also remind ourselves of the theorists like Durkheim, Weber, and Marx, who were interested in religion and its effect on society. But while Emil Durkheim was, for Emil Durkheim, religion was an expression of social cohesion, Karl Marx and Max Weber emphasized the relationship of religion and the economic and social structures of society. But the present study is concerned about social identity of a group of people. And here, in this context, the Sarna people, Oraon Sarna people of Chotanagpur. So here, we would like to look at two concepts. One is primordialist or essentialist school of thought, and another is constructionist school of thought, to be able to analyze where the where the identity of the convert tribals stands. Okay, so therefore let's look at these concepts little closely. Essentialism is the mark of the absence of temporality or suppression of temporality. It attributes, or it rather, it assumes an unchanging primordial ontology. It negates the relevance of agency itself. See, later on when we are analyzing the tribal identity in the context of conversion, it will be important to understand these two concepts. And it's about ascribed status and static end product, which is highly problematic. Essentialism has no room for choice, because a little later we'll be talking about making individual choices in the context of which religion one should affiliate himself or herself to. So it has fixed and rigid boundaries, which is unacceptable today. Amartya Sen finds problematic the singular and primal approach to identity that denies diverse diversities. In his book on identity, he speaks about diverse diversities. Now, constructionism approach builds up on temporality. It stresses on an ongoing construction rather than primordiality and immutability. It keeps changing. If you say it's stagnant, it doesn't change, there are serious problems. The distinguishing mark of constructionist approach is identity as achieved and processual. A rational choice is possible in constructionism. It has no fixed boundaries. It is porous and contextual. It is not rigid. Therefore, I'll be using this model for analyzing how the identity of the Sarna tribals is also porous, how it's contextual, how it's changing, how it's being restructured, etc. Now, the major aims and objectives, because whatever chapterization of the book is based on these aims and objectives. One of the objectives of the study is to study the what, why, and how of conversion. no matter whether the perspective is spiritual or sociological. In the book, we also look at two things, because very often in certain circles, in some circles, they give the explanation, theological explanation of conversion, because it's purification of heart, or it's acceptance of, or some spiritual experience, etc., or psychological. But in the context of Jharkhand tribals, we also see how when the missionaries first came, see the German Lutheran missionaries came to Chotanagpur in 1845, and the Catholic missionaries came in 1869. Okay, but initially there was resistance, but when people started converting to Christianity, there were two or three main reasons. One, they wanted to get rid of the spirit world, because we'll find later on how some people converted not because of pressure, not because of allurement, not because of anything else, but because they were tired of appeasing the spirits. In tribal societies, there is a belief in the spirit world, and three kinds of spirits exist in their, as per their culture. For example, Singh Bonga, the supreme being. Singh Bonga is the supreme being in Mundari. Okay, in Munda tradition. Among the Oraon tradition, it's Dharmes, the supreme being. But there are also ancestral spirits. Okay, among ancestrals also you have 2-3 types of spirits. One is Banita. Banita are good spirits. They are, by virtue of their existence as spirits, they are good spirits. They cannot be bad. Okay, but there are also some Bongas which are bad spirits. Okay, and there are other spirits, Manita. So these spirits are neither good nor bad, but if you appease them, they are good with you. And if you don't appease them, they can be very bad to you. So therefore, these three kinds of spirits are there. Now, so therefore, in order to understand the spiritual perspective of conversion, we need to understand their belief in the spirit world. And some of them were haunted by the spirits, and therefore they were convinced if they converted to Christianity, at least this haunting of the spirits will end. And therefore, that was one of the reasons. Second reason for the conversion also was to get rid of the exploitation of the zamindars, the landlords. And you remember, one of the stalwarts among missionaries was Father Constant Levens. He came to Chotanagpur in 1885, and he worked only for 7 years. And after that, he developed tuberculosis and went back to Belgium for recovery, but he died there after in 1992, or 1892 or 94. But in 7 years, there were more than a lakh converts in Chotanagpur, in various parts of Chotanagpur. And as per the archival materials, information, you come to know some initially a few converts or a few conversions, but sometimes people used to come in thousands, in hundreds and thousands. And it has been documented, since he was not able to pour water on the forehead of people, he used to sprinkle water for conversion. And sprinkling water was also a problem because there were too many people. And therefore, somebody was there to hold his hand. It could be an exaggeration, but it has been documented. But so that's one of the things we need to remember. And we do analyze some of these archival materials as well. So therefore, I'm bringing in the spiritual aspect also, because when we are dealing with the sociological dimension of conversion, then spiritual dimension doesn't fit in very well there, because you have a spiritual explanation for conversion. And that's not taken into consideration when you are dealing with the legalities and technicalities as far as our constitution is concerned. Therefore, you need to look at sociological developments and sociological conversion, way people have converted. So the present book is confined to just one of the issues, that's identity question. And a lot of materials on conversion surely, but from the point of view of understanding what happens to the identity of the convert tribals. And identity issue of the tribal Christians has been the subject of intense political discourse, of course, and therefore we'll try to look at all that. We also try to examine the emergence of new religious community. Whether we like it or not, I give one example. If Sarna community is A and the Christian community is B, and or church is B, and if there is a conversion, definitely there is give and take, and therefore it becomes community C. Sarna community also borrows something from the church also borrows, or the new community also borrows from B. So therefore, it has been a dialect of the beliefs and also the practices, not only in the new community, but also in the traditional community. We also try to examine the nature and dynamics of relationship between converts and non-converts. And very specially in the context of multi-village, where there were 359 households, 43% of them were tribal households, including the GL Church, SPG Church, Society for the Propagation of Faith, which was an offshoot of GL Church, and also the Catholic Church. Okay, so therefore, all these groups together with the Sarna community constituted 43%. There were Sadan Hindus who constituted about 27% of the households in the village. And Muslims were also there, about 24%. And therefore, there was a very good interaction among these communities. Sometimes they looked at the issue of conversion and identity from the point of view of insider, outsider, and sometimes they had debates as to whether the converts continued being tribals or not. But these are very, very problematic, which we'll discuss shortly. We also examine the interface between the new tradition and the older tradition, new and the old. What happens to that? And the way in which discourses on tribal identity have been perceived. In the introduction itself and while giving the structure of the book, I have spoken about that. So I'll not waste time on that. But let's look at this. It's interesting to see how in the past, not so much now, but even while I was doing my doctoral studies, there were many people interested in conversion studies. And even after I submitted my thesis, many people are coming to ask for my manuscript or whatever I had submitted. But interestingly, between 1974 to 84, in 10 years' time, according to Snow and Machalek, in their review essay, 95% PhD were being done on conversion studies. So that's something for us to take note of. And look at this. As I mentioned, as of now, there are 11 acts in 11 states. But even before the independence of the country, princely states, some of the princely states had anti-conversion laws. For example, Raigad, Patna, Surguja, Udaipur, Jodhpur, Kalahandi, Kota, etc., Bikaner, etc., during the British period already had. But later on, we do find in 1960, after independence of the country, Odisha, Madhya Pradesh in 1967, they had Arunachal Pradesh, Gujarat, Himachal Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand. Then later on, they also had in Madras had the act, but then they had to withdraw because of the protest. West Bengal also had proposed, but they had to withdraw. Okay. But some of other states, 2 other states also had anti-conversion laws, like Uttar Pradesh in 2020, Haryana also had in 2022, Karnataka in 2021, Assam in 2021. Tamil Nadu and West Bengal, of course, repealed. Tamil Nadu repealed in 2004. And West Bengal, it did not become an act because of the protest. But we need to understand the whole concept of Ghar Wapsi, homecoming programs. It's not really Ghar Wapsi. There have been articles by various scholars, and Ghar Wapsi is possible to the home or to the house from where the person has migrated to another religion. If somebody converts from tribalism to Christianity, then Ghar Wapsi will be to come back to tribalism also, tribal religion, not to some other religion. So therefore, there is serious problem with that concept. And about the identity of the converts also, there are problems which we are discussing, and we'll look at some other aspects as well. There is one more debate going on whether the tribes are Hindus. There are many outfits in Jharkhand. Misraji also will remember. Some have vehemently opposed this idea, but even in Mahabharata or Ramayana, we do have some instances whereby the eating and drinking habits tell us that these two groups are not together. There is hierarchy in the Hindu way of life or in Hinduism, so to say, but then in tribal societies, there is relative, I'm saying not perfect, but relative egalitarianism and relative man-woman equality. And there are other reasons also which refute the idea of tribes as Hindus. But that's very much being debated even now. I'll not go into the details of the context of our study. I have already mentioned. Now, the whole village, interestingly, was divided into 19 big and small hamlets known as kochas. And in Sarna, in one of the localities where Sarna people were there, that was known as Sarna Kocha. If the Muslims were in another locality, that was known as Julha Kocha. The Christians were in one locality, it was known as Christan Kocha, Ghasi Kocha, etc. So therefore, that itself was very interesting, and how there was an interaction. Sometimes these groups came together, a cluster of groups came together to assert their identity, or if there were some rivalries, or if there were some disputes, and if they wanted to assert their identity in terms of their strength, numerical strength, they came together. For example, two non-tribals in the same village were killed just before my field work in that multi-village, and the Sarnas and Christians and all the tribals came together because apparently there were two groups in the village. And therefore, I come back to my first argument, identity is not rigid. And therefore, these identities or these boundaries kept collapsing depending on the context. Now, these are the findings of the study. Evolution of the Oraon identity through the ages. Oraon identity is not the same today as it used to be. Are we aware of the fact that Oraons address themselves as Kurkhars, as Kuruks? Kuruk language they speak, Kuruk, not Oraon. Oraon is the term given by the colonizers. But the Kuruks have also internalized that today, and therefore they are very comfortable with the term Oraon. And therefore it was a big discussion when I was giving the title to my book, Religion, Conversion and Identity, a sociological study of the Oraons. If at all, Oraons, that's Anglicized. Oraons is also Anglicized, but Oraon is closer to what they would like to sort of address themselves as. We cannot call them Kuruks because Oraon is a term which is accepted by the constitution also, because by virtue of their Oraonness only, they have received the status as scheduled tribe. And therefore, that's highly problematic if we use some other term. We cannot even use Adivasi for them. Adivasi definitely in common parlance, but I'm coming to that shortly. But when we look at their identity, self-identification of the Oraons was Kurkhar or Kurk, and in the pre-colonial period, uh, the tribes, not necessarily Oraons, but tribes were enumerated as or recognized as a homogeneous, self-contained unit without any hierarchical and discrimination. That was a big difference between the tribals or tribes and the Aryans. And they were outside the Aryan civilization. Okay. And nomenclature of the Vedic period was based on their physical appearance, religious practices, attitude towards outsiders, because still many of the tribal groups, or some of them like Hos, the Mundas and Santals in the remote areas, consider the outsiders as Dikus. Diku means strangers or aliens. So now you'll ask me another question. So what happened to the missionaries if they came to the tribal land and converted the tribals? If they were Dikus, how could they accept the missionaries? One of the explanations given is because the missionaries worked for their emancipation, for their liberation. And therefore, since they were under the influence of the landlords and the zamindars, and they were being exploited by them, and some of these missionaries, including Constant Levens, and also Hoffman. Have you heard the name of Father John Baptist Hoffman? Had a mastery over Mundari and wrote 16 volumes of Encyclopedia Mundarica. And it was Father Hoffman, since he knew the Mundari language, and also there were any number of protests and revolts by the tribals against the Britishers, and the Britishers asked him how to address the problem of the tribal resistance. Then Father Hoffman seems to have impressed upon the Britishers, unless and until you address their agrarian problem, their problem of land alienation of the resources, you are not going to solve the problem of tribal revolt. As a result of which, they came out with Chotanagpur Tenancy Act 1908. So Father Hoffman was instrumental in drafting of that law, which still exists. There have been several amendments. Okay. Now, so I'm just talking about how in the pre-colonial times they were identified as the groups identified by the names of some of the leaders. In Rig Veda also, some leaders, tribal leaders like Arbuda, Krivi, Namuchi, Pipru, these were the tribal leaders, and their tribes were recognized by their leaders' names only, collectively. And also, there have been other explanations by Sarat Chandra Roy or Grignard, etc., how these tribals, or rather Oraons, called themselves Kurukhas. But when the Aryans came, they, instead of calling them Kurukhas, they called them Karushas. And later on, if they were angry with them, if the tribals became hostile, they called them Dasyus. Those who were subjugated were called Dasas, but those who were hostile to them were sometimes called Rakshasas also, because they played on the two terms, Karushas and Kurukhas and Kurushas. We'll not go into those details because there are much more important things than dealing with these nomenclature at that juncture. But coming to the colonial period, I find something very interesting. Tribals in general were also known as codes, or sometimes these Oraons were known as kodas, because koda means korna, digging. In some parts of Singhbum, etc., they are known as, or Odisha, also part of Odisha, they are known as kodas. But they are an offshoot of Kuruks only, or dhangars, because they worked as dhangars, as slaves, or as servants. And in the colonial period also, how they identify these people by their physical features, by their general backwardness, and by their beliefs and worship, and by their social status. I find it interesting because during the colonial period, in the census 1891, do you know the tribals were enumerated as forest tribes? Forest tribes. And nomenclature at that point in time depended on their occupation as well. In 1901, they were enumerated as animists. 1911, they were enumerated as tribal animists. Then they were enumerated in 1921 as hill and forest tribes. In 31 as primitive tribes. In 1935, when the Government of India Act came into existence, they were enumerated as backward tribes. Again, 1941 census, they were enumerated as tribes. And finally, in 1950, as scheduled tribes. So therefore, there has been a trajectory, and there has been an evolution of the tribal identity during the colonial period. Tribe is basically a colonial construct. Tribe is basically a colonial construct. But let me share with you one anecdote. It's interesting because some of us are in this hall are also from the Northeast. In 2004, I was working with Indian Social Institute, New Delhi. And the government was framing a tribal policy. So at Indian Social Institute, people from all over the country came, from the Northeast, from southern part, from central India. We were about 120 people. And I was also in the drafting committee. And on the last day, we wanted to have the mandate of the entire assembly before we could present it to the government. Okay. So the first line, the preamble read, "We, the Adivasis of India," blah, 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 later on. So we had some friends from Northeast. They got up and said, "We are not Adivasis. We are tribals. We are not Adivasis." So there, you see, there are problems for various reasons. Okay. Now also, the scheduled tribes, or tribals, or the so-called Adivasis who have migrated to Assam, tea gardens, etc., they don't have the scheduled tribe status. They are known as tea tribes. Those also, some of them backward, OBCs, but they don't have the same status as their kiths and kins in other parts of the country. But this I found interesting because the nomenclature has kept changing over the decades. Now, coming to the post-colonial period, of course, in 1929, when Jaipal Singh Munda, he was a member of a Constituent Assembly debate, of course, much later, during the independence and before the framing of the Constitution, and he was a member of that, and he was pushing for the term Adivasi. But term Adivasi was not acceptable to Ambedkar because it didn't have a sort of legal status. Adivasi in general would be very difficult to sustain or maintain in the context of the entire India, and therefore it was not acceptable. Ambedkar said Adivasi was general term without any specific de jure connotation. The term scheduled tribe, Anusuchit Janjati, had a fixed meaning because it enumerated the tribes. That was the reason. However, Professor Virginus Khaka says, as of now, tribe means the dispossessed, discriminated against, and those who claim to natural resources, those who have been on the margins of society, etc., and who have been struggling for protecting their identity. So Khaka also says what has been imposed or superimposed on the, not only on the Oraons, but on tribals in general, has been internalized by them, whether it be the Oraons or even some other tribes. So therefore, they have internalized it because in the context of Oraons, they would prefer calling themselves Kurkhar or Kuruk, but now Oraon, an anglicized word, has been imposed upon them, but they have internalized that. So having said that, let us now look at, we have dealt with this, but how formation of new religious community has taken place. Now, the conventional understanding of conversion and its impact is allurement, force, or unfair means, etc. But in the village of my fieldwork, in the universe of my fieldwork, I found that there were other reasons for the conversion of these people. They were influenced by their peer group or neighborhood influence, desire for progress and prosperity in life, and ostracism of the members from the Sarna community. I interviewed a person, Soma Joseph Oraon, who was more than 100 years old. And soon after my field work in that village, when I went back to Delhi, unfortunately, he died. But then at least I was able to get a lot of information from him, because when the missionaries first came to the village, already in 1860, I mean, at 69, but thereafter, he was a witness to whatever was happening, and himself was converted. Some of the members of his family were converted, others not. Therefore, he was able to give me the first-hand report of what was happening. So I found ostracism was one of the main reasons. In that village, I found out of 7 conversions, at least 2 of them were ostracized, and therefore I said in the beginning, to avoid the spirit world was responsible for the ostracism, because Soma Oraon was the head of the village, and many people were dying, or many things were happening which they didn't expect, or which went against the community, and they said, you are not taking care of the spirits, and therefore you should be ostracized. So he was ostracized because of that only. In some other cases, people are accused of witchcraft or of mishaps, accidents, etc. And therefore, or if in some families, some deaths are there, sometimes they blame people of witchcraft, etc. In such cases, also people are sort of excommunicated from the ethnic community. So some of these cases also converted to Christianity, so that they could avoid the haunting of the spirits. So I did find in this village also, but more importantly, work marriage conversion complex was the most prominent factor responsible for conversion, because spouses were working together in the same place, in the same school, in the same hospital, or both of them were educated. And if it also has happened, if the girl was a Catholic or a Christian and boy was a Sarna, then he naturally accepted or embraced Christianity. And in some cases, 1 or 2 cases, even girls have gone to the Sarna, and they are, but that's not part of my study. But now I know 1 or 2 cases whereby girls have embraced Sarnaism. They don't go to the church any longer. But in the village, most of the conversions took place because of marriage alliances and work marriage conversion complex, as I call it. From fragmentation to convergence. So despite the notions of betrayal and deviance, or fragmentation, I did find a kind of confluence or understanding or restructuring negotiations. I know there will be some questions on how it happens, because if we look at the rites of passage in their chatti, initiation rite, marriage rites, death rites, etc., or death rituals, etc., then how do we look at the negotiations between the old and the new? Or how is the church trying to negotiate with the tribal culture? What is happening in the context of feasts and festivals? To my knowledge, from the archival materials, uh, two tribal festivals were being celebrated in the church, even without the mandate of the Vatican Council, Vatican II. I'll speak a little more on the Second Vatican Council, but these two festivals, tribal festivals, were Noakhani, Feast of the Harvest, and also Sohrai, Feast of the Animals. Okay. And it's very interesting because Sohrai, which coincides with Deepavali, because it's celebrated along with Deepavali only. Okay, so Sohrai and Deepavali, and therefore many people may think that it's part of Deepavali, but it is not. It's a tribal festival. It's little tradition, not from the great tradition. But this Sohrai is there, but no Nayakhani or Nawakhani, these two were celebrated right from the beginning. But let me also very humbly submit that in the church, there was little rupture, because initially the missionaries also said or prohibited the converts to go to the akhada or dancing yard for participating in the ritual dance with the Sarna brethren, because they thought it was not accepted, it was not in conformity with the doctrine of the church, it was not compatible with the church. As a young boy, I still remember the drums were not allowed. Mandar drums were not allowed. Flutes were not allowed because they were considered to be the tribal instruments. So therefore, there was indeed a rupture, but the Second Vatican Council in 1964 interpreted the church doctrines and the tradition of the church in a new way, in conformity with the developments, and it opened its door to what they called inculturation with various traditions, not only tribals, but with other traditions. And therefore, in 64, when the Second Vatican Council in Rome sat, they also published a document which is known as Vatican II documents, and one chapter deals with how church should express itself through other cultures, including tribal cultures. So therefore, there was opening. And I remember late Dr. Bishop Philip Eka, who had his anthropology, PhD in anthropology from Oxford in London. He came back to India, came back to Ranchi, and along with some fathers like Father John Lakada, Father Peter Paul Vanufal, etc., they started composing hymns which could be sung in the churches. Then they started playing drums and the flute and other tribal instruments in the church also. But prior to that, things were prohibited. And Christian tribals were not allowed to dance with others in the akhada or in the dancing yard. So therefore, there were moments of disruption, deviance, and alienation, surely. But what I'm trying to argue is that was at one point in time, that was the, let's say, initial phase. But ever since all that happened, there had also been processes which were trying to negotiate. And in these negotiations, there was a restructuring of the identity of the tribal Christians. Now, another area of controversy is whether the converts are tribals or not. Definitely, I have spoken to some extent, but one insight I get immediately is the tribals are given the status of scheduled tribe by virtue of their, in the context of Oraons, by virtue of their Oraonness. If they are not Oraons, if they are not Mundas, if they are not Hos, they'll not be enumerated as scheduled tribe. And this list was first notified in 1950 by the President of India. So therefore, this also keeps changing. So this is also not static. Some of the tribal groups could be descheduled tomorrow. There has also been a demand for the scheduling of the Christian tribals, etc. And therefore, that's also porous. That's also contextual. But what I'm arguing is, by virtue of one's Mundaness or Khariyaness or Honess or Santhalness or Kurukness or Oraonness, only one gets the status of a scheduled tribe. And therefore, contestation here is not Oraonness. Even if the detractors contest their ST status, they are not contesting their Oraonness or Mundaness. And therefore, if you are not able to take away their Oraonness or Mundaness, how can you take away the scheduled tribe status? Therefore, this is one of the arguments given. The argument also of believerhood and citizenship. Because if one is converted, whether he ceases to be a citizen of the country, because sometimes there have been contestations or there have been voices, but these are for political reasons. Therefore, if you look at it from academic point of view, I don't think we can take the argument very far, because as some of the scholars call it, some of these are sterile debates. And therefore, rather than keeping in harping on them, I think let's proceed. This we have already seen, but I would like to talk a little about how the identity of the convert tribals is restructured in the context of their feasts and festivals and social relationships. I analyze that in the context of Chatti of Monica. I take some case studies, one from the Christian community, another from Sarna community, and the third one from outside. And I do find there are certain areas of difficulties. For example, doctrine could be one. When they have celebrations of Chatti, prior to that, they have baptism in the church. They take, let's say in this context, Monica. Monica is a baby to be baptized. She is taken to the church in Mandar, and the priest gives a homily. Whatever baptism is being given or administered on Monica is in the faith of her parents, because the child does not understand what the baptism really means. But baptism, which is a sacrament for the Christians, is an external sign of internal grace. That's how they define baptism. That's a sacrament. That's something sacred. That's baptism, pouring of the water and making the sign of the cross with the holy oil on the forehead of the child is an external sign of internal grace that the person is receiving. So all this is done. And they call it baptism is the door to all the other sacraments, as is done in the context of tribals. They have, Oraons, for example, have Dhumkudiya. Are you aware of Dhumkudiya? Youth dormitory. Maria Gonds have Gotul. Nagas also have something. Many tribal groups in the past definitely had, but right now many of them have forgotten about these social institutions of education. These were meant for socialization of these kids. And therefore, in youth dormitory, they learned how to beat the drum, how to show hospitality to the guests, how to respect their elders, and how to learn the etiquettes, etc. Everything was taught to them. As far as the Christians and non-Christians are concerned, it was very much the same. relationships have initially some rupture you can see here and there because of various reasons. But when it comes to asserting their identity as, collectively as a tribal group, they come together. They have come together. In the double murder case, for example, or in the case of showing their tribal identity to assert their, to demand for their rights on Pesa or on Jal Jangal Zameen. So they have come together. When CNT Act, Chotanagpur-Dr Act was being amended, or there were attempts for their amendment, CNT and SPT Acts, the Sarna and Christian groups came together, and there were demonstrations, there were protests, as a result of which the whole process had to be aborted, or it did not succeed. So therefore, it's the culture which has brought Christians and non-Christians together. But we have also seen how sometimes religion could be a dividing or divisive factor. But there have been continuous negotiations. Now, I have already spoken about this, so I'll not go into the details. How much more time do you have? 5 minutes. Okay. Yes. Now, one of the comparisons, one of the areas of comparison between the tribals and the Hindu society or dominant society is the hierarchy. As I already pointed out, tribals are basically communitarian. Okay. And their decision is taken by consensus. Even if there are big guys, big swords in high positions in the government, if they come back to the village, they have to sit in a circle, and somebody who is presiding over the meeting is not imposing his ideas on others, but his responsibility is to listen to people, listen to the members who are present, and at the end, synthesize all the voices and place the decision before them in conformity with the expressions or with the opinions of those who are present for the meeting. And therefore, there's a consensus. And therefore, their society is basically egalitarian. Their life is basically communitarian. And therefore, these are some of the things which set them apart from other dominant societies. But as far as the Sarnas and the Christians are concerned, I found all these the same in both the communities. No different, absolutely no difference in their social relationships. So when we make the comparison, we have to see their beliefs and their practices. In practices, I did find some problems or some differences. For example, when they go to the church, of course, they have to follow everything as per the rubrics of the church. When they come to the village, after baptism in the church, they come back to the village, and in the traditional way of naming a person or name-giving ceremony, they would take 2 rice grains, put one, and then second one they'll put in a leaf cup of rice beer, and they keep dropping the grains one after another, and the name has to come first of all, if it's a boy, from the side of the father, from the grandfather, great-grandfather, etc. And if the second grain, which is dropped in the rice beer, doesn't touch the first grain, then they go on taking one name after another till both the grains meet. So therefore, since name-giving ceremony has already taken place in the church, they don't enact this once again, but there are other social sort of celebrations in the village which they carry out, because they have also to live with others. And I didn't find any difference between the celebrations of the Christians and those of the Sarna. In marriage also, I found similarities, except for marriage blessing in the church. When they come back, it's all the same. So belief pattern definitely is different. But my argument is, as TK woman also calls it, that's interesting. Let's look at this statement by TK woman very closely, and that will explain what the identity is all about. What people normally do is use one identity as a whole identity or entire identity. In fact, this identity is used as a total identity. Methodologically speaking, that identity is used as a mistaken part for the whole. I have several identities. My identity as a Christian is one small part. I have an Indian citizenship identity. I have a Malayali identity, and I have the identity of a professor and a sociologist. Why are all these identities relegated to the background while you zero in and overemphasize only one of my identities, my Christian identity? If you study my time expenditure for a week, maybe a month, I spent nearly 90% of my time as a sociologist, roughly 5% to 7% as a family man, and maybe only 1% as a Christian. Yet you reduce me to that 1%. Hence, identities are contextual, situational, fluid, and porous. So we do find identity definitely is problematic. And if we understand it within the rigid boundaries as primordial identity, there are serious problems. And therefore, I argue that in the context of tribal identity also, the same principle applies. And despite the fact that there have been some problems and some ruptures, experiences of ruptures, they keep restructuring and they keep negotiating. And as we saw in the context of the tribal festivals being initiated in the churches. And we also saw how the various rites of passage are being negotiated. And for political reasons also, there have been continuous restructuring and negotiations going on. And therefore, I do argue that the status of scheduled tribe, which is a constitutional category, is on the basis of their Oraonness and not on the basis of the religion. And therefore, if we take only religion, which is one of the many aspects of their identity, we will be making a mistake. And to conclude, I would refer to the 8 dimensions of identity given by Dr. Ramdayal Munda. For example, social, cultural, philosophical, geographical also, historical, because tribals also have collective histories, they have collective memories, etc. Geography or territory is also an important part, their worldview, etc. Their religious identity, their apart from the worldview, they also have art and aesthetics. Therefore, whatever drums we spoke about, singing, dancing, etc., it's part of the interview. So therefore, he gives these 8 components of tribal identity. And when you try to look at the identity of the Christian tribals, you do find they sustain all of them, including religious identity, except for Sarna religion. Therefore, Sarna is not an ethnic group. An Oraon is an ethnic group. Sarna is a religion. Sarna name nomenclature is coming from the place of worship. And therefore, we have to look at it from that point of view. And therefore, Ramdayal Munda was also in favor of Adi Dharma. Not right now, it's very, very problematic and debatable, so I'll not speak much. But then it's about Sarna code, so therefore, that's also problematic. But the tribals have been pushing for the Sarna code, but Ramdayal Munda was arguing for Adi Dharma. And so, what is being argued here is it's the basically the Oraonness, Mundaness, etc., which gives one the status of scheduled tribe, and therefore there is no negotiation on that, and therefore there have been continuous negotiations going on, and and therefore their convergence and confluence is what I could gather from my study and which I am promoting. And time and again, there'll be these ruptures, these deviances, or these fragmentations will keep coming. But because there is no rigidity and this is porous, it will continue being negotiated. And that's how people, tribals, irrespective of which religion they belong to. Remember, Sarna, these tribals don't only belong to Christianity, they also belong to Islam, they also belong to Hinduism. Remember, Gurre, in his book, The Tribes So Called, on page 18, has written about tribals, the tribes so called. Oh, no. What did he say? They were like, because in their practices, they are like Hindus, no? And therefore, they were like the Hindus only, but not not up to the level of the other Hindus, but they were also like lower class Hindus, etc. He doesn't say that word, but then that escapes my mind. But Gurre has written about the tribals, the so-called, and therefore whether they are being absorbed in the Hindu society, etc. That's also highly problematic. But I think we have a lot more space for further research and further discussion. Now, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Kujur, for that very broad and detailed analysis. So in the interest of time, we'll take just a few questions. So if there are any questions over here, we can take it. And if there are any questions on Zoom, maybe we can take that. But if there are any immediate questions here, then maybe we can take some. Yeah, Nishant. So you can begin, and then we can take.
Hello. So, uh, thank you very much for the very interesting talk. And I think you made a good argument on the idea if there's culture is kind of the definition of, a tribe, then, it seems that as you mentioned, then the converted people and the non-converted people do share many cultural similarities, and there's a porousness there. So that, in that sense, and even as you said, the Vatican Council for not just India, but entire, all Catholics said that culture and culturation is now, a feature of that. So, that's also fitting. But there's it seems like there's also a philosophical issue in which there, like, that framework of culture cannot resolve, which is that in one arrangement, there is a primacy of the spirits, the bongas, right? They have the place in the, they're active and they control many things in the world, and lineage, death, births, everything they affect in many ways. And so, as you said, like, even in my field work, I saw like a lot of Christians, they want to, maybe converted Christian, they want to get away from that, or they have some issue with that. It's not necessarily they don't believe, but they want to distance. But once they enter into the church, the primacy of the bongas comes down, right? It becomes subservient to God, right? And to the church doctrine. And that issue doesn't seem to be resolved by culture. So, and the spirit world gets, in the metaphysics, gets subservient to the, the world in which there is one God. Now, that's not just for converted Christian, but also secularism or, any other kind of thing. But so that seems to me like it cannot be resolved by culture. So I just want to hear your thoughts on that.
Very good question. Actually, I was expecting that question, because that's one of the problematics of the whole dialogue and negotiations as well. At this juncture, let me also point out, while we do see many similarities, etc., And church has also been able to negotiate some of the cultures, etc. But there are certain things as far as doctrines are concerned, they come in conflict with some of the belief patterns of the tribals. One of them being the spirit world. And especially the bongas are evil spirits, or actually they call bonga, but bongas are not evil spirits. Bongas are simply spirits. It's a spirit world. And uh, where negotiations are taking place, I'll point out. What you say is very true. When they go to the church, definitely that may be at the back of their mind, or that they become subservient. But when they come back to the village, again, the same things happen. And here, one of the anthropological principles, perhaps we can remind ourselves of, two constituent elements of culture. One is external manifestation, and another is inner sort of internal makeup. Internal sort of shaping up or makeup takes decades or centuries. It takes years and years or decades or centuries as to how we are sort of, our psyche is framed. Why does a tribal behave the way he or she does? Because of this. So that has taken centuries. But external manifestations can change overnight. There is one more notion, anthropological notion. Spiritual culture, material culture. Material culture will change overnight, depending upon the influence. But spiritual culture, which has been ingrained, will take years. So in this context also, though they have been converted, but you do find many Christians engaging in black magic when they go back. But they also continue the spirit world, not in the same way, but they also have belief in the ancestors. They don't forgo that, even after their conversion. But what the church is insisting upon is, while in the past they had to sort of placate the spirits, bad spirits. I'm not saying evil spirits, but bad spirits. As I said, there are three kinds of spirits. Good spirits, which are naturally good. They cannot be bad. There are other spirits which can be, which are bad. They are bad only. They cannot be good. But there are some spirits which are neither good nor bad. They are like sitting on the fence. If you appease them, they are good. If you don't appease them, then they can harm you. So therefore, here, one of the reasons why they converted to Christianity is because of this. And therefore, church has a little problem if they continue opposing the evil spirits. But you do find people falling back again and again to some of these. But if people are educated, if they are urbanized, etc., so these things you see less and less. So, but I do agree with you. What you said is very true. And for example, I'll just give you an example of death ritual. How it happened. Now, I'm not giving the entire details. It's in the book. But at the time of death, when a Sarna person dies, when they take the person for the burial to the cemetery, Christian women, Sarna women, both of them drop millets or cotton or some rice grains while proceeding towards the cemetery. Okay, why? So therefore, this is the question of belief, which Christians are doing, Sarnas are doing, even after conversion. So the belief is, and see how it's very difficult to eradicate that belief pattern from their mind. Because the belief is, if they go to the cemetery, the dead person's soul will roam around. And in order to prevent the spirit of the deceased from coming back to the home and haunt them, they drop these millets or the rice grains, so that they keep picking up these grains throughout the night. And by the time they finish picking up, it's already daytime. So daytime, they cannot come and haunt them. So therefore, but this is one of the practices, or one of the customs which both are performing in the same way. So there are many such practices, but one problem I also noticed, for example, church is not ready to compromise on its doctrines. Therefore, in fact, I also critique one aspect. Therefore, as far as the leadership is concerned, they have consensus, but the church has hierarchy. Now, of course, it's developing into synodality because of new developments, etc. But that is one of the discrepancies, or that's one of the areas of further research. But definitely spirit world is one area which requires little more insight, little more investigation. But there are certain areas whereby I'm talking of the villages. In the urban areas, of course, they don't bother. In the villages, urban areas, for example, even the Sarna people wouldn't bother what's happening to the spirit world. But in the village, surely, because every village has its own boundary, and every village has a set of spirits, and one spirit is supposed to guard the village. And it will not allow the spirits from other villages. What happens in the human world is happening in their mind, in the Sarna world also, in traditional tribal worldview. So therefore, all those things are happening, and tribals who are living along with the Sarna people in the villages and so on, they continue practicing and believing some of these things. But definitely, as far as the church is concerned, that part of appeasement to the spirits is prohibited. Otherwise, there are problems, but negotiations are taking place. But we need to have more research and more work. Perhaps we can continue this discussion. But there are more questions now.
Anyone else? Yeah, Professor Subba.
First of all, the word that J.S. Ghure used was backward Hindus.
Yeah, correct, right.
Yes.
It came to my mind later on. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, just helping you with your memory. You said that Oraons have become civil tribes because of Oraonness, not because they are Christians, right? Now, is it that simple to talk about Oraonness? Who are Oraons has become a big issue, big debate already. Now, and that kind of debate is there among a lot of tribes in central India as well as in northeast India. Now, who is in Oraon? What makes a community an Oraon community is something that cannot be taken so lightly. And if being Oraon was that simple to entitle them this status of civil tribes, why would Oraons not be given civil tribe status everywhere they are? They are STs only in certain locations of India, in certain states of India, and not everywhere. As you gave the example of Assam, where the Oraons are not civil tribes. Now, does it mean that they are not Oraons? That is something that you need to address. And also, I think you need to address this fact that a large number of Oraon boys have joined the RSS indoctrination camp. Now, how will that affect the Oraon identity in the long run or at present also needs to be explained.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, you have hit the nail on its head. But my argument is that Oraonness as the basis for scheduled tribe status is not a simplistic argument. And whether in one part of the country, whether Oraon group is recognized as ST or not, it's a political issue. And therefore, I mean, and therefore agitations have been going on both in Assam as well as for Andaman and Nicobar Islands also, because many people have migrated more than 150 years ago to work in the tea gardens in Assam and also to clear the jungles in the Andaman Islands. Okay, so that being said, I come back to the Oraonness and so on. If you try to analyze, dissect the very notion of identity. What is it that makes an Oraon? As I said, pre-colonial period in the Rig Veda also, there were not Oraons as such, but then as tribals were enumerated differently, or they were identified by their certain physical features, flat nose, dark skin, etc. Eating and drinking habits. Now, ST status is given only to a particular groups which have earlier they used that term backwardness. Now they don't use that term anymore, but because of their social and also educational backward. Educational, they were backward. So therefore, because of educationally and socially, culturally, they were different, distinct. Therefore, they were enumerated as part of the scheduled tribe. Therefore, there are many other tribal groups which may not necessarily be enumerated in the scheduled tribe list, and therefore they are not scheduled tribes, but they may their cultures or their characteristic features may be very akin to those of the Oraons. But because they have not been enumerated, they have not been identified in those terms, therefore they have not got the status. They have not been scheduled. And your question also reminds me of the Supreme Court judgment, in fact. Karthik Oraon contested election, parliamentary election from Lohardaga constituency. David Munjni, who was a Christian, I'm talking of 1960s. He also contested, and David Munjni, a Christian, defeated Karthik Oraon. And so he claimed, Karthik Oraon claimed that David Munjni, being a Christian, was not a tribal. Because, see, the seat was reserved not for tribal, but for scheduled tribe. Not for an Adivasi. It was reserved only for scheduled tribe. Okay. So he lodged a complaint with the election tribunal. He lost there under the ground that even if he was a Christian, but then he had all the other traditions, customs followed by David Munjni as per the tribal societies. And therefore, there was no question about his tribal identity. I'm still using that generic term, which is problematic. Now, he appealed in the Patna High Court. There also, he lost for the similar reasons. And then he appealed in the Supreme Court. He lost there also with the same argument, with the same verdict was given. In the Supreme Court also upheld the verdict of the High Court and the election tribunal. So this happened. But I'm questioning, I was thinking about this question for quite some time. What is it that makes an ethnic group, I'm not even calling it a tribal group, an ethnic group part of the scheduled tribe? Because of tribalness, but tribalness, there is no tribal religion as such. You can talk about Naga religion, you can talk about Oraon religion, you can talk about Khariya religion. Where is the tribal religion? Where is the tribal priest? Do you have one tribal priest like Pope of Catholics, or in GL Church you have one bishop? Now something is being tried out. That's a different matter, but you don't find one tribal leader who has sort of jurisdiction over all the tribal groups in India. So therefore, these are some of the reasons. But one Oraon who, by virtue of his Oraonness, has only become member of the, or he is on the list of the, he is on the scheduled list of the tribal groups, and therefore, as a result of which, he has been given the status. So this is my simple argument, but then we can look into other complexities and nuances, perhaps closely, jointly. But right now, this is what strikes me, because I do not find any other argument, because if Oraonness is an ethnic identity, if we talk only about religious identity, that's only one part of the larger identity. Religious identity can be changed. Can one change his Oraon identity? If you're born like an Oraon, if you're born a Bengali, can you become a tribal tomorrow? I don't think so. So therefore, it's by virtue of someone being an Oraon, because of his or her Oraonness has been, because Oraons, Mundas, Khariyas have similar physical features, linguistic features also, though there are they belong to different linguistic groups, etc., but without going into those details, and because of earlier backwardness, etc. Now, what the Scheduled Tribe and Scheduled Caste Commission in 1952, 8 points, 8 characteristic features of the Scheduled Tribe given is simply outdated today. One of them is the tribals are carnivorous. They are meat eaters. They have primitive uh, 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 costumes or what you call it, primitive way of dressing. And there are 6 others, but all of them seem to be outdated today, which was given in 1952. As per the Constitution of India, Article 342, there is only notification about the provision for the scheduled tribe status, but it doesn't define who a scheduled tribe is. But definitely we need to look into other nuances and other dimensions. I'm ready to sort of think over it, and then we'll get back later on.
There's one question on Zoom. If we can take that, if that is saying that, what is the implication of religious conversion on economy and in indigenous economic practices?
Very good. Initial years, formative years. Let me first place before you 3 periods of Christianity. Formative years, when the missionaries came and conversions were taking place. Formative years. Then years, period of consolidation of Christianity, and expansion. Expansion started taking place later on. Okay, number 1. Now, what's the economic implications? Initially, missionaries or the church also had plans for the tribal development. And in fact, that was one of the reasons for conversion also. But let's also remind ourselves of Asli, Nasli, Fasli. There are 3 types of Christians. Asli Christians are Christians who have converted, but they are loyal to the church, loyal to the faith. Fasli are seasonal. If they get something, they'll be loyal, and if they don't get, then they'll leave the church and go away. Nasli are Nakli. Okay, so therefore they make a distinction. But initially, missionaries, foreigners came, and then they had a lot of plans for the development. You know, they had Dhan Gola. Dhan Gola is a grain bank. We are talking about land bank now, but they had grain bank. And all the household, because basically tribals were Christians or non-Christians were agriculturists. And so therefore, annually, after the harvest, they used to deposit some paddy rice in that land, this grain bank. And next year, when they needed the pipe for cultivation, okay, for sowing the seed, they came and collected that at a lower rate. And they also had the bank. You know, Father John Baptist Hoffman, who was responsible for Encyclopedia Mundarica, he also started a Catholic Cooperative Society, which is known as Catholic Bank. He started. So therefore, serious implications. But let me also share with you, initially, it was very confined only to the members of the church, members of the Catholic faith. And there were questions whether it should be open for others. To slowly they started opening, but basically it was restricted to the membership. But because of the church engaging in education, still in many parts of the tribal areas, but initially when there were no government schools, missionary schools were the first ones, and that was one of the attractions. And it was believed, whether it was true or not, we'll have to judge it together. But in many cases, it was true because they were educated and because there were health facilities, and there were some projects for development in the past, and therefore a lot of implications in terms of their development. In my study, I also quote Balbir Datta, who was the former editor of Ranchi Express, where he had given a comparative study of how the Christians had some of the prominent jobs in the government, and how they were educated, more educated than their counterparts. And therefore, Karthik Oraon had one argument on the basis of that, कि Christians were benefiting more than the Sarna or non-Christian tribals, and therefore he was also in favor of descheduling the scheduled tribes. So that time it became a controversy, and it continues now also. But there were serious and far-reaching consequences, economic implications. And you do find tribals more educated, more developed in many of the villages. If you go, if church has made interventions in those villages, irrespective of whether Catholic Church or GL Church or CNI Church, but you do find. But now, as I said, restructuring takes place continuously in the Catholic Christian schools also. All the Adivasis are most welcome, and they are also giving reservations to the Sarna people, and they are. So this is also another process of negotiation, and they are moving together towards tomorrow, so that the entire tribal society could be developed or empowered. Yes, thank you.
Okay, I'm sure there are many more questions, but we have to sort of end the session here. We can continue the discussions after the formal closure. So with that, I think I would thank Dr. Joseph Marianus Kujur for having taken out time from his very busy schedule and come here and share his research with us. I think it has benefited all of us, especially those who are working with the Adivasi communities. So once again, on behalf of the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, I extend a very warm thank you, and we hope that we can have you more for further engagements at our institute. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor.
So I think we can.
Junior.
Sorry, so we can just have maybe a one quick group photograph, and then we can continue the conversations over tea and coffee. So I would request all of you to maybe come here in the center, and then we can have a photograph, and we can depart for the. Thank you so much.